going to tell you a bit more. Clearly a modest person. Well, I'm thrilled to introduce our speaker, Rabbi Denise Handlarski, who is the founder and leader of Secular Synagogue, an online community. She's the author of the A-Z of Intermarriage and is also a doula, teacher, and mother. So I'm pleased to have her. Before I actually let you start, I want to say a special thank you to Greg Malkin, who made this all happen. This would have been a disaster otherwise. He just solved about 400 problems without anybody knowing about it. So I am thrilled out of my mind this has worked out so far. So thank you, Greg. Okay, Denise, take it away.
Okay, thank you, everybody. It's great to be with you. I wish I could see you. How many people do we have in the room? I have no idea.
Oh, 25.
Got about 30 people, I would say.
Okay, amazing. Well, Shabbat Shalom. I hope everyone is well. I'm delighted to be with you all, and I'm so sorry that we're not able to be together in person. Hopefully one day, but we're not quite there yet. It's nice to see that you're gathering in person though. So this is great. So thank you very much for organizing this. Thank you for having me. And it is a bit of a short bio, partly because I'm going to be telling you more about myself as we go through the presentation. So I'm going to just go ahead and share my screen, and I will rely on you to let me know that you can see this okay. Is that good?
Yeah.
Okay, it's just loading for some reason. Okay, so this is a presentation called Flip the Script, the A-Z of Intermarriage, based on the book, the A-Z of Intermarriage, available from Amazon in a Kindle or hard copy paperback edition. So I would be really grateful if you would pick up the book, because one of the things about this book is that it came out in March of 2020. And is everything okay there?
Yes.
It's fine.
Okay, great. So I don't know if you know, there was another significant world event in March of 2020, and people weren't out shopping. So I'm always delighted to talk about the book because I really wanted it to find its audience, and I think communities like yours are the perfect place, because I think you're already gonna share perspectives that I share in the book. So I'll go ahead and launch in. But part of what I wanted to do with this book was challenge what I think of as the tired intermarriage narrative. So I wrote the A-Z of Intermarriage because I was tired of hearing the same old boring story about how intermarriage would be the end of Judaism. It wasn't true. It wasn't true in my life, in the lives of my congregants and wedding clients, or according to demographics. And so I'll just read from the very introduction of the book a little bit. And it expands on this narrative and the impetus for the writing. When I was a teen, I attended a talk called The Disaster of Intermarriage. At that time, I remember seriously wrestling with the idea that if I married someone who wasn't Jewish, I'd be giving up my identity. I also, however, had a tinge of a feeling that this was somehow racist or xenophobic in some way. Couldn't you be both proudly Jewish and open to creating a family with someone who is different? There are now many thousands of intermarried Jews in North America, most of whom are raising children Jewishly, practicing Judaism in some way, and participating in Jewish community. Yet the narrative of intermarriage as disaster remains firmly in place. So I wanted to create a book about intermarriage that was fun. Much of the material out there is very serious. Often it's very negative, but even the resource material that's out there, which is good stuff, has a fairly academic tone. And a lot of my wedding clients especially were looking for a book that would help them talk through some of the struggles they might be having, or when they do have something they need to talk through in terms of decisions to be made. And I didn't have a good resource for them. So I wrote one, and that's how the book came to be. I'm also intermarried, and so this is personal as well as my professional interest. I do work with tons of intermarried folks and intercultural and diverse families in all kinds of ways, but that also includes my family, and I would consistently struggle with being in Jewish spaces where people were denigrating my family. And I wanted to help change the narrative for that reason as well. So we have the A to Z of intermarriage. All right, so sometimes I go back to biblical tradition, and it's good on Shabbat to sometimes consider sacred text. And so from the book of Ruth, many of you may know, and this is a text traditionally read at Shavuot, Ruth replies to her mother-in-law Naomi, "Don't urge me to leave you or turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God." And Ruth is considered one of the matriarchs in the Davidic line, which is also the line, according to tradition, that the Messiah would come from. And it's important to note that she joined a Jewish family. Not everybody who joins a family that's Jewish chooses to become Jewish themselves. Ruth does. She says, "Your people will be my people and your God will be my God." So it's a very instant conversion or adoption into Judaism. She doesn't have to take classes or visit the mikvah or do anything fancy. She just says, "I want to be with your people." And she's considered one of the holiest people in our textual tradition. It also was good enough for Moses, who marries Zipporah, many of us know from the Passover story, the daughter of a Midianite priest. And that intermarriage helps Moses learn the leadership skills that helps bring the Jews out of Egypt. So there are three things I urge people to think about when they do have some resistance to the idea of intermarriage, or they're still caught up in the old narrative about how terrible it is. So first, it's something called intermarriage math. This I first learned actually from Paul Golan, the executive director of the Society for Humanistic Judaism. But when he first said this, this was even before he was with the society. He was working for Big Tent Judaism, often on issues of intermarriage. And when he said this, it blew my mind. So maybe it will blow your mind too. So if you have two Jews, I hope folks can see my hand gesture. It's the best I got. If you have two Jews and they marry each other, you end up with one Jewish household. But if you have two Jews and they each marry somebody who isn't Jewish, you now have two Jewish households, or at the very least, two households where there might be Jewish culture, practice, Jewish activities, Jewish education, etc. And by the way, no guarantee when two Jews marry each other, they have a Jewish home, right? Lots of people get told you just have to marry someone Jewish, and there's no what's next. So we have a lot of people who married somebody Jewish out of a sense of obligation and still don't lead particularly Jewishly involved lives. But the idea of the intermarriage math is that you could end up with actually two homes. So if people's concern is Jewish continuity, and intermarriage might mean that there are fewer and fewer Jews, and therefore Judaism itself is under threat, we might see intermarriage as an opportunity for Jewish continuity in terms of multiplying the numbers of Jewish families and Jewish houses. I want to say I'm not particularly worried about Jewish continuity in those terms. I'm actually much more worried that what we call Judaism will become so corrupted with some of the things that many Jewish communities are focused on, including stopping intermarriage, that actually takes away from Judaism's beauty and power. I don't need Judaism to exist for its own sake. I want Judaism to exist to make our lives better and to make the world better. That's what I think the purpose of Judaism is. And so I'm not that worried about the numbers. I think that as long as Judaism is doing its job, people will always care about it. But if you are worried about numbers, intermarriage math may help you. Another thing I sometimes have people think about is, what would the alternative be? If you want to live in a world where there's no intermarriage, what would it look like? So at one time, there was very little intermarriage because Jews were forced to live in ghettos and weren't allowed to marry others. Surely that's not what we're looking for, right? Some people do prefer to live a kind of siloed life. We have, I live in Toronto. We have some Jewish communities where they are rather insular, and people don't tend, even though it's legal, of course, for them to go wherever they want, they don't. They choose to stay in their Jewish community. But that's not what I want for my family. I intentionally live in a very, very diverse area, diverse in all kinds of ways, lots of cultures, races, religions, socioeconomic statuses. I want my children to go to school with people who are not like them, because that's how you learn about the world. And we certainly don't want to live in a world where Jews are othered and hated. It's nice that people love us and want to marry us. And of course, I'm not saying there's no anti-Semitism. There is certainly anti-Semitism, but I find intermarriage very hopeful. Because often when a Jew joins a family where there haven't been Jews before, people's anti-Semitic biases can soften. It's hard to hate people who you come to love. So, if we want to live in a world where we have democratic societies that are open, where Jews are accepted and celebrated, intermarriage is inevitable. People fall in love. Right. And that's a wonderful thing. So, I do question people on what they hope to see in terms of the world that would make intermarriage impossible. And then lastly, I think the personal was political, the good old feminist adage. Anti-intermarriage diatribes, I think, have done much more harm to Judaism than intermarriage itself. So when I attended that event as a teenager, which I mentioned from the introduction of the book, I was really turned off of attending Jewish spaces. It made me feel like this is not for me. I didn't yet know about cool forms of Judaism that were more egalitarian and critically minded. Every Jewish space I entered up until that point had been very Jewishly conservative. And when I heard all the anti-intermarriage stuff, I was like, this is not my values. And if I'm going to be in community with people, I want it to be around shared values. So I do worry about all the people who have left Judaism because of this narrative. And of course, because if you are intermarried or if you're children of intermarriage and you hear this kind of stuff, you're not going to hang out there. Right. So we know people left in droves who otherwise would have added to the beauty and diversity of Judaism and kept the tradition evolving and growing. And so I think that's a real concern. I think that the answer to people who are worried about Judaism's continuity is just that we have to do Judaism well. So I'll read to you a bit from the book. So I have a section. And I'll just tell you a little secret about the book. So it is alphabetical, moving from A to Z. And in every letter, there are 10 entries. So 10 for A, 10 for B, etc. And in the G section, I knew I needed to address G for God, but I wasn't sure exactly how to approach it. So I, serve people who are secular Jews or culturally Jewish, humanistic Jews. But a lot of the people who I wanted to have access to this book don't necessarily identify that way. There are tons of liberal Jews who have all kinds of conceptions of God, ranging from, I believe in something, but I'm not sure. Most folks I work with don't believe in the God of the Bible. So I wasn't sure what to do in this section. And I also wanted to address the fact that some intermarriages are what we might call interfaith marriage, where you have people of two faiths who come together, and some we might call interfaithless marriages, that you have two different people from different cultures or heritages, but neither one particularly considers themselves a faith person. And the dynamics are often a little bit different. So in the G section, I was like, what am I going to do with the section? How do I reach everybody? And here is where I actually decided to stick one of the main theses of the book. So right under G for God, it says, one of the contentions of this book is that all marriages are intermarriages. As we were working on this book, my editor heard this doozy from someone. A couple was preparing for their child's bar mitzvah. Their father was a Shabbat keeping, conservative Jew who wanted traditional liturgy. The mother was skeptical of the language of prayer and was raised Reform, but was essentially a humanist or secular Jew. They couldn't agree on how to approach the bar mitzvah. Even in marriages in which both partners are Jewish, we still find intermarriages. Me, as a secular Jew, marrying a secular person who was raised without religion, but with cultural traditions around Christmas, is far less of an intermarriage than, say, me as a secular Jew marrying an Orthodox Jew who would expect synagogue attendance, daily prayer, keeping kosher, and so on. All marriages are intermarriages. And sometimes people are really, it's the first time they've thought about that, but I notice similar dynamics come up with all of the couples I work with on their marriages. Excuse me, regardless, you might disagree on the sorts of things you want. One of my favorite weddings I ever did was I co-officiated with another rabbi, a Reconstructionist rabbi, because it was a very secular, sort of hardcore atheist Jew marrying a very religious, sort of conservadox Jew. And they're a lovely couple. I work with them. They're both kind of active in the Toronto Jewish community. The secular one is a member of my online community, Secular Synagogue. I know them well, but they beautifully work through the kinds of issues that would come up in any intermarriage together. It really is often easier for people to marry somebody who might not be Jewish if they're Jewish, but has really similar attitudes towards theology. I think that when you disagree about theology, that can be still a beautiful marriage, but might present more challenges. And so I'm just, I really think about that a lot, how all marriages really are intermarriages in their way. Now this book came out before the most recent Pew survey, so of course I don't have the 2020 data, but I did include the data from the 2013 Pew survey on American Jewish life, and also there was a Canadian population study for Jews in 2018, so both are in there, and both suggest the same thing. It's interesting, and this appeared again on the more recent Pew survey. There's a real bias in terms of how some of the data is reported in the language they choose to use. So for example, the researchers focus primarily on those who are not raising their children Jewish by religion. But they could have framed it differently, because when you actually see, and I give a chart in here, I don't have it open to show you. I don't have this one digitally, but this chart makes clear that the majority of people are raising their children with what they say, at least some form of Judaism. So the categories are Jewish by religion, partly Jewish by religion or mixed, not Jewish, or other. But where would my children fit in there, who are very deeply Jewish? We did Shabbat this evening together. They know the, secular blessings. They know the traditions. They sing. I wouldn't call them Jewish by religion necessarily, maybe, but that doesn't quite capture it for me. But they're certainly very Jewish. And to even read the data as they frame it, the vast majority of people are raising their children with some form of Judaism. But the bias comes out. They say most people are not raising their children primarily Jewish by religion. It's not capturing the fullness of the picture. But when you just look at the numbers, if you just look at the data from both the American Pew report and the Canadian study that came out, it is clear that intermarriage is not harming Jewish community. And sometimes people say, well, yes, but what kind of Judaism are they doing? Is it real Judaism? We have to stop this, right? I bet everyone in the room right now has been told they're not a real Jew, or they're Jewing it wrong, doing it wrong, that it's like what we're doing is invalid, right? We get told this stuff. It's certainly not making us more religious, right? It's not productive. And the reality is there has been, people who are atheist Jews, secular Jews, since the beginning of Judaism. There was a great story of a woman This is in the book Doubt, A History by Jennifer Michael Hecht, of a woman in the Second Temple period who's so angry at the idea of God, she takes off her sandal and she, smacks the temple wall with it. We're not new. The founders of the modern nation state of Israel were proud secular Jews. There is nothing new about being Jewish in alternative or non-traditional ways. And so, yes, Judaism might be evolving. And I know that makes people uncomfortable sometimes. But what if Judaism hadn't evolved after the destruction of the temples? There would be no Judaism at all. We must evolve. That's how we stay. That's how we guarantee continuity. And finally, less oi, more joy. Also very funny is, so my editor really liked this line, and in her office cubicle thing, she has a whiteboard, and she was reading this book right towards the end of the year in 2019. That's when we were doing the editing. As I mentioned, it came in March of 2020. So right before the end of the year in 2019, she wrote 2020, the year of less oi, more joy, which later was hilarious. It was a real oi of a year, but I'm delighted she liked the line. So this comes in the J is for joy section. And I talk about, lots of us, it's easy to fetch, it's easy to complain. And certainly recently we have a lot to complain about. But actually, when on the scale of things, if you look at all of human history, we are leading unbelievable lives. We have relative security, we have food, we have shelter, not everybody, of course, but on balance, is there a time in history you would prefer to be alive? Because I don't think there's a time in history I would prefer to be alive. I wake up every morning to my organic, delicious coffee, and I get to send my children to school, and, we just have so much awesomeness all around us all the time. And that doesn't mean there aren't problems, right? Of course, there are lots of problems. But I do think often Jews, and I recognize this can play on a stereotype, so I want to be careful and respectful, but sometimes Jews are prone to complaining and looking. I'm not shocking anybody here. You've heard some Jews complain sometimes. And some Jews look, have a glass half empty perspective. I actually think there's a lot of joy and exuberance in Jewish culture as well. So it's really kind of, there's a spectrum there, and it doesn't have to be one or the other. But I think very often Jewish people, because we have a tough history and have been through so much as a culture, tend to focus on the oi and less on the joy. And in this book, I really just wanted to say we need to change that. And the whole intermarriage narrative has been one of so much oi. Oi, the end of Judaism, oi, Jewish continuity, oi, I'm going to have a son-in-law who celebrates Christmas, oi, I can't believe it, but think about the joy that we give up, right? When couples approach me, and this is true for all of the rabbis who do intermarriages, they're often sort of apologetic. They'll say, so we're planning to get married next fall. I don't know if you do intermarriages. He didn't grow up Jewish, but he's very kind, and he's interested. And you don't have to be so apologetic. You're telling me you're getting married. My first response is always mazel tov and congratulations. This is not an oi. This is a joy. We should be very delighted when people we love are in love. And sadly, all the stuff around intermarriage has turned these joyous moments of engagements and weddings into stressful, sad experiences. And that, to me, life is just far too short. So I wanted to talk about the joy. And I'm speaking here more to people who are intermarried also, if people are giving you a hard time about it or don't understand it, don't let them rob you of your own joy. Please welcome joy into your hearts and homes. Don't let folks get you down. And I say, I experience so much joy when I do Shabbat with my partner and our kids. And it fills me with joy to know that he continues this even while I'm away. I had a long day today, so he goes to get the challah and sets the Shabbat table. So everything's kind of ready for when I get home, right? He's not Jewish, but he loves it too. I delight in the joy of his family celebrations too. They don't have to be originally mine in order for them to bring me joy. And sometimes joy is hard to come by for Jews. A lot of Jews have grown up with a lot of negativity and harsh circumstances. It is telling that in the Yiddish culture, the common answer to "how are you" is "how should I be?" We are sometimes, right, a kvetchy, complaining people. So sometimes we need to experience a little less oi and a lot more joy. And here is, I don't know if you can see this picture, but it's a very pandemic focused presentation because when the book came out. This was my first COVID wedding that I officiated. So this was March of 2020. And, people went into lockdowns at different times, but this was about a week after our lockdown. And so they had a very big wedding planned of about 400 guests. That obviously could not proceed. We did proceed with the marriage itself. You can see us. This is the gazebo in the back of her mother's condo building, and only her parents, me, the couple, and the photographer are there. Others are zooming in. Didn't realize how many Zoom weddings I was going to have ahead of me. He's Jewish. She's Filipino Christian. They planned a ceremony involving elements of many cultures. And this couple deserved to be sad and mad. You know, they had spent a ton of time and a ton of money and raised their expectations for the wedding of their dreams. And right at the last second, it wasn't happening. And a lot of people would have been embittered. And they said, no, this date is important to us. They were getting married on the anniversary of the date they got engaged, which was the anniversary of the date, their first date. They really wanted to keep that date, and they didn't want to wait a year. So we'll do it however we have to do it, because the wedding isn't what's important. What's important is the marriage. And I love this picture because you could just see, he's smiling big too. You can't see it as much, but she has such a huge smile on her face, and they're just choosing joy. They have stuff to kvetch about, but they're going to choose joy. When I did this presentation, someone said, "You have the biggest smile on your face, Denise." And I said, well, I think it's remarkable how resilient people can be. And I think love is part of that. In all of the ways I approach Judaism, which can be kind of scientific and secular and sometimes a little bit cerebral, what it's really all about is love and connection. And I think it's awesome. So I feel like you're more on side with this already, but with some communities I've said, we need to sometimes change the questions. So instead of like, what will intermarriage do to Judaism? To which I answer, well, we don't have to ask. We already can see what it's doing, right? Judaism hasn't died, and there's been lots of intermarriage. And right now, I feel like there's a beautiful resurgence of really engaged, awesome Jewishness in the world. I don't know whether your community has done much with the fact that this is a Shemitah year, a sabbatical year, but I hadn't really heard much about sabbatical years previously. And now there's so much going on with art and creative stuff and liturgy, all about how we need to rest more, and what does it mean to look to some of our Jewish sources for wisdom about how to balance our lives today in our very frenetic world. So beautiful. And I think that's sometimes as a result of the diversity in Jewish life today, that people are bringing in more energy, new ideas. It's a really creative time to be in the Jewish world. Okay, but if you are still stressed out, how can we change our questions? So here are some of my questions. How do we create an engaging and meaningful Jewish life for ourselves and our communities? How do we ensure intermarried and intercultural partners and families are fully welcome in our spaces? How do we make Jewish practice accessible, exciting, and dare I say fun? You're allowed to have fun, you're allowed to laugh. It's not supposed to be so hard all the time and full of guilt. How do we ensure Jewish continuity no matter what the demographic trends and no matter who people choose to love? How can we make up for the hurt that this old narrative has caused? And what is our narrative or a mission statement or a mantra going forward? So it could be less oi, more joy. By the way, my publisher, when I do one day visit you in person, my publisher made more joy, less oi stickers. And people like those stickers. So that's fun to keep around. So it could be that, or it could be, Judaism is powerful, beautiful. Doesn't matter if you're doing it right or wrong. And, you know, we've already made so much headway. I didn't know any intermarried rabbis when I was a kid. I knew very few women rabbis when I was a kid. This is a picture of my wedding. And my children are the children of both intermarriage and of a rabbi. And they'll never have to wonder if that's possible. Right? We are just forging paths for new generations where you can be fully Jewish and fully who you are. You can be Jewish and another culture or religion, or you could be Jewish and do it in all kinds of non-traditional ways. We don't have to make it so hard and tell people they can only be half of who they are anymore. Some of you might know Rabbi Miriam Jer. She's in the picture with us as our rabbi. Okay. So my questions continue. You know, I think at any age or stage of life, no matter whether you're married or not, it doesn't really matter. I think that this is a time of possibility. And I mean, that's especially true now. We've all sort of been through something in the last year and a half. And as we emerge out of it in whatever way that looks like for us, I think that many of us do feel changed in some way. And it's a good moment to pause and ask ourselves some questions. You know, what is possible in my life? What do I really want? What do I care about? Like, what have we learned in this last while about what's truly important? What are we still struggling with? Right? How do we actually want to live out the rest of our lives? I know it's often framed as a terrible thing, but I see it as a good thing that so many people right now are changing jobs, or, you know, like moving across the country or doing all kinds of radical things. And I mean, I get why it's a stress because we don't have enough people working in restaurants and coffee shops, you know, and sometimes it's hard to see how things will go on, and maybe they need to change because I see a lot of people deciding that life is too short to keep doing stuff that isn't making us happy or isn't making the world better. And I find that very hopeful. And I see that in Jewish life too. People are thinking about what they want their Judaism to look like and do for them in new ways. And I'm excited. Okay, so I just put, you know, I run an online community called Secular Synagogue, always online, not just pandemic online. And if you're curious about it, we're at secularsynagogue.com. You can also find me through secularsynagogue.com if you want to reach out about any questions or check in with me about anything. And those are my formal slides, but I hope that now we can have a little bit of conversation.
Thank you so much. It was fabulous. Okay. Can you hear us pretty well?
I can, yeah.
Okay, so we certainly can take some questions. I thought that was really excellent, a really nice synopsis of it. Maybe I'll ask you the first question. I think a lot about the fact that people don't join organizations much, including synagogues. In our own group struggles with people not joining. And I wonder if for intermarrieds especially, is it going to be more of a struggle to find groups to connect with? And can you do Jewishness by yourself? I guess it's even in a family unit, that's something, but I just think of it as more of a communal thing. And I kind of wonder about the future of people joining and that type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think intermarriage is one part of that question. I think, you know, it's not just Judaism that's seeing people not join communities, like churches are closing. This is an all religion problem, I think. And I don't know that it's solely about intermarriage. This is what I will say. There are a lot of people who would have joined communities who got turned away, or there are too many barriers. So, I mean, that's part of the thing that's so bonkers about the anti-intermarriage narrative. It's about Jewish continuity, ostensibly. And they say, like, we're so worried about continuity. We're so worried people don't join our community. And then they say, oh, but you're not really welcome here. Right. Doesn't make any sense, you know? So certainly the more inclusive and welcoming, meaningfully we are with as few barriers, the better that is for communal growth. I certainly agree. Judaism is best done in community. There is no question about that in my mind. I don't know for sure whether that will always be served with a congregational model. I think people join community in all kinds of different ways. But I recognize it's a struggle for people who are looking for kind of members. So it may swing back to that. I wouldn't be surprised, and it may continue to evolve where people find community through nature-based groups or, other kinds of Jewish communities. So I guess it remains to be seen, but I certainly do hope that anybody who wants to find Jewish community is able to. And in larger urban centers, I think there's no question there are lots of programs that are very welcoming to intermarried folks. I think in smaller places, it can be more of a challenge.
Okay, let's see, questions. So I'm going to take the microphone around, so hopefully you'll be able to hear, okay?
Great.
Let's see, we'll start with Margaret. Get the whole.
It is very concerning. Why has anti-Semitism risen its ugly head? It is all over the world as well as in this country. And I know Jews aren't the most loved in the world, but why at this point in life is there so much anti-Semitism?
I mean, I wish I knew. I have some answers, but I don't know that I'm going to tell you anything you haven't already heard or considered. I think that there has been a sharp turn to right-wing politics in North America and Europe primarily, and in some like Latin America, lots of places. And often the very far right-wing politics have been very anti-Semitic. It does concern me that also, I think some of the ways social media works, people see things that aren't true and there's nobody to correct them and people exist in their little echo chambers. I think we've seen in history before, I also teach history. It shouldn't necessarily surprise us in some ways, because when people have struggled and things have been really hard in the past, often Jews get scapegoated, and we're living in a time of significant struggle. So I don't really know. I like to believe that the vast majority of people are either not anti-Semitic or are the kind of anti-Semitic that can be educated. Just like there are tons of people who harbor racist bias, but aren't intentionally hateful, right? I do think there are a lot of people that exist there, and I'm hoping that they can be reached. And I think there are a lot of initiatives right now to try to reach them. And I think, I know this sounds a little bit kumbaya, but I do believe it to be true that we combat hate, in fact, with love. That the more we can just show that Judaism is beautiful, that Jews contribute a lot, that we make the world more peaceful and more just, it gets harder and harder to hate us. A lot of the people who are really anti-Semitic, the really hateful ones, I don't think they even understand what Judaism is. So we might join conversations, we might share things with our neighbors. And as I said, sometimes when a Jew joins a family, that can be the difference maker, where they say, oh, what I thought about Jews, that's not you. So it's a huge challenge, and I don't really have all the answers.
Thank you. Let's see.
I'd like to see if you could comment on the success of intermarriages, because I'm personally going through an interdivorce. I got married by Bobby Barble, who's our dream here 24 years ago, and during COVID, my wife decided to become a Christian fundamentalist, and I'm not saved, so we can't be married. So I guess I'm kind of, what have you observed with all the right-wing stuff that's happening? And just, how successful, there's lots of divorce already, but how successful are intermarriages?
Right. Well, I'm so sorry that happened. Interestingly, that is a question I also have, and I have never seen any kind of stats or even qualitative research on the success of intermarriages as compared with in marriages of any kind. So I have no data per se. So everything I'm going to tell you is based on just observation, right? But it seems to me that intermarriage itself is rarely the cause of marriages breaking down. And that's partly because when folks choose to come together in an intermarriage, I mean, honestly, by the time they see me and they're looking for a rabbi for their wedding, they've already likely sorted out a lot of the stuff about how they'll run their home and what they want to do. Sometimes people haven't fully figured out how they'll raise their children, and sometimes people change their minds on stuff. But for the most part, people do come together across shared values. Some of our values might be informed by the religions or cultures we grew up in, but sometimes not, or sometimes enough of that is shared. I once heard a really interesting speaker, and I would give you her name, but I honestly can't remember. It was years ago. And she said, often marriages can survive 2, but not 3 big issues. And she was sort of talking about intermarriage in this frame. She was a Christian faith leader, but she said, you know, so some couples fight a lot about money. Some couples fight a lot about how to parent. Some couples fight a lot about like their lifestyle, where they want to live. Are you going to live on a boat? Somebody decides they want to move really far away, or someone wants to live in a big city and someone in a small town, that kind of thing. And some people can't decide whether to have a Christmas tree, right? Because of the different cultures or religions in their home. And she said, generally in her observation, marriages can survive 2 of those, but not 3. If you have 3 big issues, that's like, so I kind of think of intermarriage that way. It might not be a huge issue. For some people, it's really not. It might sometimes create conversations you have to have, challenges to the relationship. Certainly not more so in my experience than things like money and parenting. So I think for the majority of people, that's not it. Your example reminded me of something else I was thinking about in the all marriages are intermarriages frame, which is that I knew a couple, and they were both like relatively secularly Jewish. I think, you know, they might not have identified that way, but they lived a very secular life. They had a Jewish home where they did some of the holidays, but really they were very secular. And then one of the man in that couple wanted to become ultra Orthodox Jewish. So again, still 2 Jews, but the marriage couldn't withstand that, right? He wanted his wife to suddenly like not work and, you know, all this stuff. It's, you know, sometimes when people are hurting, they do turn to religion. I don't always like it. I do understand it. It's a system that gives you all the answers and tells you exactly what to do and how to live. And sometimes when things are really hard, that is very appealing. And it is hard for marriages to withstand that. Overall, I think intermarriage can often enliven marriages. People like learning about each other's cultures. I can't tell you how many Jews are delighted to finally get a Christmas tree in their house. In my experience, you know, people who aren't Jewish love learning about the traditions of the Passover Seder. You know, I think that it can add richness and beauty to lots of marriages. And as far as I can see, it's not usually going to be the thing that ends a marriage. But I would love to know for sure. I hope one day someone does a study.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for an interesting talk. I have a question again, sort of a statistical question again. In your experience, and we are a very small sample here, but in your experience, do you think that more intermarriages occur with a Jewish woman and a non-Jewish man, or a Jew? I have an idea, although we have a very small sample here, as I said, but I'm thinking that a woman would be more likely because, well, it's sort of a traditional thing, but, you know, she, in a sense, runs the home and spends more time with children. My feeling is most of them would be with a Jewish woman, where the marriage would, where the Jewish tradition would continue rather than with a Jewish man. So I was curious about that.
So there is interesting data because of the researcher Karen McGinnity, Dr. Karen McGinnity. She's wonderful. And she, if you're interested in this topic, I would recommend her books. She has 2, and they're both about gender and intermarriage. So one tracks more men who intermarry and the other tracks more women who intermarry. And in it, she says interesting things. So along the lines of what you're saying, yes, it was for a long time considered that men were marrying out, which is a terrible term. You're not out, you know. And women were still Jewish, but now we have this like non-Jewish spouse. Obviously, I just want to name, there are a lot of people in gay relationships and this gender stuff doesn't apply to them in the same way. But if we're thinking of heterosexual couples, yes, often women are still, data tells us, more involved in the raising of children and inculcating identity. What she did find that might surprise folks is that very often if a Jewish man married a woman who wasn't Jewish, that woman took on a significant amount of the work in raising Jewish children, even though she's not Jewish herself. So that is so interesting because we would expect a Jewish woman who marries somebody who isn't Jewish to do most of that work. But I don't know that I would have expected a woman who isn't Jewish to do most of that work in terms of raising Jewish children. But that is what Karen's data found. So it seems in either case, right, as long as the Jewish man wants his children to have Jewish identity, he doesn't even have to be the one to do it in many of the cases. You know, it's good and bad, right? For all the reasons you can imagine. I wish more men in general were participating more fully in the home. I think we've made some headway and I think there's work to do. But her research on gender and intermarriage is really, really interesting. So if you check out her books, I can't remember what, I think one is called Marrying Out, something like Men and Intermarriage. But if you look up Dr. Karen McGinnity, or if someone wants to send me an email and remind me to send you the names, I can certainly do that.
Thank you. Maybe we'll take one last question.
I come from a very large extended family. Most of them I don't know. They're way out on the tree.
Okay.
And about 100 years ago, they became Catholic for political reasons.
Okay, yes.
Then recently I learned, oh yeah, but the Catholics marry Jews. So they came back in. And I wonder how common, is there any data yet would show that?
I don't know. Trying to think of anything. I can't think of anything on this. Certainly that would give you data in terms of numbers. I can certainly tell you there are many accounts of conversos who find their way back to Judaism, sometimes through marriage. You know, so for example, there are many stories you can find where somebody will say, I had no idea I had Jewish heritage in my family. This is a person who maybe grew up in Cuba or something, you know? And they end up somewhere along in their life. Maybe this person moves to the US or something, and they find themselves drawn to somebody who's Jewish. They end up getting married, and then eventually they trace their lineage, or someone in their family tells them that they had Jewish ancestry as well. And sometimes they feel like, well, no wonder I was attracted to this person. We shared so much. So I've certainly heard things like that. I can't think of any specific sources to give you, but I mean, I think just because of the way technology is aiding us in learning more about ancestry, you know, with people taking DNA tests and things like this, which, by the way, there's interesting research on the, you know, the good and the bad of those. But a lot of people are discovering they have Jewish heritage, and a lot of people, that is prompting them to learn more and sometimes join Jewish communities. So that is the dynamic that's happening, certainly.
We might have, Dorothy, would your question be very, very short? Okay.
And make actually a comment. I have long intermarriage family, and I wanted to say I think that the rise of anti-Semitism is convenience and laziness of those who join groups or they're peripheral, maybe some years of their lives, and all of a sudden they can let that shine in their life because others are. And so I think that that's a good reason or a real reason why anti-Semitism rises all over the world. It's very easy. We've been hated, so let's hate them. You don't have to pick a new group, like American Indians or something. And so that's, but I just wanted to say about intermarriage. The old David Suskind talk show, if any of you remember it years ago, they had, I'm from an interracial marriage. And so I was watching this one night and had two couples. This was very, it was years ago, years and years ago. Now everybody in the television is intermarried, but interracial, not sure. And when this, they were talking and somebody asked a question about racial slurs. What does your wife say to you? And this man said, if my wife wants to get to me, she doesn't need a racial slur because we're married. She knows what to say to me.
Right.
And that, covers it all. It shows you how that is so stupid to be the other way because it's just a surface thing.
Thank you for that comment. And I think we're going to end. Denise, thank you so much. This was fabulous.
Thank you for having me. Good to be with you
so much.
individually. Thank you so much.